Hey guys, this is part 3 of your 8.2 PowerPoint on Meso-American cultures. Make sure you watched part 1 and part 2 before you come and join us for part 3. We're talking about Hernan Cortez and the Aztecs. Alright, so hopefully you have your facts about Hernan Cortez down from the last video clip, right? And you kind of refreshed your memory about where the Aztecs are located, that little purple area on the map. And there's a little more up close map for you. You'll want to write down when they were active from about the 1200s into the 1500s. Really, pretty much when Cortez finds them, he's going to wipe them out. That's what's going to kind of cause the end there of the Aztecs. So what's the deal with the Aztecs? Let's talk about them a little bit. Their capital city is Tenochtitlan. You'll want to draw a line underneath everything you just wrote from Cortez. Make yourself a new area to write about the capital city of the Aztecs, Tenochtitlan, okay? So the Aztecs believed that they would receive a sign when they were supposed to settle down, because for a long time the Aztecs were a migratory people, okay? They did not settle in one place immediately and try to build towns and villages and settle down farming in one spot. They were kind of more hunters and gatherers, right? They moved with the land. And there was a story that got passed down from generation to generation that there would be a sign from the gods, because they too are polytheistic like the Mayans were, that they should be looking for, okay? And that would tell them where to settle and try to build their home base. Okay, and this went on for several generations. What they were looking for was an eagle. Okay, not so hard to find. But this eagle had to be perched on top of a cactus. Okay, that might not be so easy. Not because there's not cactuses around. There were. But think about a cactus, guys. They're all pointy and prickly. What eagle's going to want to land on one, right? So not only do you need to find an eagle on top of a cactus, but that eagle had to have a snake in its mouth. Okay, so now your odds are getting kind of slim, right? And so this took a long time, but eventually one day as they're walking around, somebody spots that very thing, an eagle sitting on a cactus with a snake in its mouth. The problem is it's in the middle of a swamp on this weird shaped island that wasn't going to be easy to get to in the middle of swampland. Is this really where we're supposed to settle? Well, that's what the gods told us to look for. We're doing it. And so they build their capital city, Tenochtitlan, right there in the middle of this lake. It is currently part of Mexico City. Okay, so if you've ever been to Mexico City or know where that is, in Mexico, that's kind of where, they are at when this happens. And so they make this island their home. Okay, so that's a little bit about Tenochtitlan. That's kind of what it looks like. They use a grid system, guys. They make kind of like in Italy, how they have the canals, right? Using boats to get around from one section of land to another. Tenochtitlan used that same kind of technology and kind of a grid or block pattern, right? It was an island, so there it is, kind of a aerial view of what it would look like. Okay. You can still go there to this day. You can tour it. It's still there. There's some Aztec ruins there. So here's a piece of Tenochtitlan. Okay. Go ahead and draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page and give yourself a question for the information about the capital. And then usually at this point in the year, at some point, somebody has asked me, Miss Fox, when are we going to talk about the Mexicans? Like, where are the Mexicans? We've talked about Indian people and Asian cultures, and we've talked about Africans, and we've talked about Europeans and all these people. Where are the Mexicans, Miss Fox? Here's the reason, you guys. We have not talked about Mexicans yet. Up until this point, the Mexican culture did not exist as a race. That's right, you heard me. They did not exist, okay? If you look at the Mexican flag, what do you notice in that flag? Look at that. We've got an eagle sitting on a cactus with a snake in its mouth. Now, why would the Mexican flag have an Aztec story as the center crest on its flag? Well, here's why, okay? The reason why they use the flag, and this is just for fun, you guys don't have to write this down, is the way that you ended up with the Mexican culture were the Aztec people living in what will be known as Mexico eventually, living there, okay? And the Spanish people coming from Spain, like Cortez and his men and other explorers that will follow, have relations, okay? Some of these relations end up with a baby. And so if you take a Aztec person and you take a Spanish person and they have a baby together, that is how you get the Mexican race. And those are the first Mexicans. So the Mexicans as a race are not around until the 1500s. That's why we haven't talked about them yet. Okay, but that's where Mexicans come from. So if you are Mexican, you have somewhere back in your lineage some Aztec blood somewhere, and you have some Spanish blood somewhere, because somewhere along the line, that's how we start getting the Mexican race. Okay. All right, so back to things you should take notes on. So you want to take notes on class structure for the Aztecs. Nobles are the highest class for Aztecs. That included the emperor. So they do have an emperor, they have a ruler like the Mayans, except in Mayan class structure, they had their own like ladder, their own rung on the pyramid of social importance, right? In Aztec culture, the emperor and the priest were lumped together as the noble class. So they're the most high. Then you have the intermediate class, which is kind of like the nobles and other classes. It's the more wealthy merchants and artisans and men and women of leisure. And then you have the commoners. They called them the commoners instead of calling them the peasants. But the commoners were, 80-85% of the population, guys, right? The farmers, the soldiers, people who made baskets and made pottery and those kind of things. And then they did have slaves. The Aztec culture are the ones that are super known for human sacrifice by like far and away, way more than anyone else we're going to discuss. So the Aztecs had a lot of human sacrifice, and they used slaves often, not always, but almost often, as their human sacrifices. They used slaves. So if you got into a tangle with an Aztec tribe and you lost, that was no bueno for you. You would probably die. Now, to be chosen as a slave, you had to be considered good looking, okay? Because they wanted to sacrifice you to the gods. So they don't want to offend the gods with someone who's overweight or unhealthy or unsightly for some reason, with a lot of scarring or bad acne or something like that. So you had to be beautiful in order to be considered to go and be sacrificed. But yeah, a lot of human sacrifices with the Aztecs. Okay, so there's their class structure. And this is part of class structure. You can keep going with the same section of your notes. Again, they have slavery. Most of the time it's prisoners of war, but there are some exceptions. If you broke the law, instead of having like jail where you physically go into jail, you would be put into slavery, and eventually you could work your way back out if that was the case. Also, if you fell into debt, okay, you couldn't pay something that you had, promise that you would, then you'd become a slave and you could work your way out. Now, if you're a prisoner of war, you're just stuck. You're going to be a slave forever. They do have a lot of rights, though. So being an Aztec slave, other than the fact you might be sacrificed, which was no bueno, right? But on the whole, being an Aztec slave was way better than being a Mayan slave. They treated their slaves way better. You could own your own property, usually had plenty of food. You could actually have a fairly nice life as an Aztec slave, other than the fact you might die because they might choose you to be a human sacrifice. Okay. Also, slavery didn't pass on to kids. Like when we eventually formed the United States of America, right? And we have America. If you owned slaves when slavery was legal here and those slaves had babies, guess what? Those babies are slaves now too. That's how it worked in most of the world, okay? Slavery would pass on to kids. But with Aztec slavery, nope. If you had kids, it would not pass on to them. Your kids were born free. And a lot of times they could earn their freedom as well, like I was saying. Okay, now you want to draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. Okay, how about warfare for the Aztecs? These are the two things that the Aztecs are kind of known for: human sacrifice and warfare. Out of any of the groups, the three groups we're going to talk about, the Aztecs by far and away are the most deadly. Every male in Aztec culture had to go through soldier training. You had to take your turn to go work in the Aztec army. They had bows, arrows, spears, clubs, wooden swords. They had volcanic, stones that they would shape into different types of blades. What they don't have, guys, that you often think of Indian groups having, or horses. But remember, until the Columbian Exchange starts, there is no horses in the New World. North and South America don't have horses until Europe brings them over here. So no, there's not horses. So nobody's up there on horseback doing combat. They're all down on the ground fighting each other when they fight. But the Aztecs are constantly at warfare, like literally pretty much every day on any given month of any given year, they're at war with somebody. Why? Because they're polytheistic, but they believed their most powerful gods, okay, and their chief god, the head of all the gods, needed human blood to stay healthy and strong. And so if they were not continuously feeding their gods this human blood to keep them strong and mighty, the whole world would end. Okay, so in actuality, to them, it was a mercy. It was not something like they were just savage and crazy and liked bloodshed and ha 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 ha. Okay, that wasn't the deal. The deal was they thought that, you know, we're sacrificing a small amount of people in all reality in comparison to the whole population in order to save the entire planet. Like they thought that weight was on their shoulders. We need to keep the gods healthy and strong, giving them this human blood. Animal blood is not as potent, it's not as magical, it's not going to help the gods as much. They need human blood. If we don't provide enough, then the whole world's going to die. Okay? And so that's why they were always at war, catching these prisoners, right? Prisoners of war, and using them for sacrifice quite often. Okay? Sometimes you'd sacrifice a couple people in a day. There were ceremonies throughout the year, though, where you might sacrifice 10,000 people or more in one day. Like thousands of people, guys, sometimes would get sacrificed at a time. All right. Draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. Okay, now for Aztec religious beliefs, you want to make this its own section. They're polytheistic. Remember, all of the ones we're going to talk about are polytheistic. They believe in more than one god. The Aztecs by far had way more than the Mayans. The Aztecs have a god for like almost everything. There's well over 1,000 gods in the Aztec culture. They have elaborate ceremonies and rituals that would take hours or days, sometimes multiple days, these ceremonies and things. They sacrificed other things besides humans, depending on the god, but humans are what they're famous for, and they did do a lot of human sacrifice. So again, they need that blood to stay strong and happy, and only human blood for some of the gods would do. Animals for some were okay, but some of the gods needed human sacrifice. Okay, here's some things for you. This is actually a legit, like they used to use it, all right? The goal of any good priest, if you were good at your job, is that you would be able to cut open your sacrifice victim and grab onto their heart while they were still while it was still beating and that person was still alive, okay? And actually rip it out of their chest and hold it up to the crowd, right? With the heart still beating. That actually took skill. You had to do that a particular way or the heart wouldn't be beating anymore. And that person on the table within, you know, mere seconds is obviously dead, right? Because they just had their heart pulled out of them. So it was a fairly quick death, and they gave you a drug beforehand to kind of help you feel like you were in La La Land and didn't know what was going on. It was considered an honor to be sacrificed. You had a dinner party thrown for you the night before. Your family was honored because you're helping keep alive the planet. Remember, they honestly thought this was their duty or the entire planet would die. And so it was honored. You know, you were honored to do this. Not that you maybe wouldn't be scared, of course you would be, but you'd go up the big long steps of the pyramid and, you know, they would say these prayers and do these rituals over you and then cut you open, tear your heart out, hope it's beating still, right? And then they'd actually cut your limbs off and they'd throw them out to the crowd. And the person that captured you, whoever the warrior was that captured you, was actually had the right, if they wanted, to collect those limbs, take them home, cook them up in a special stew that they had, and eat it, okay? And they believed that that gave that warrior magical powers and like almost kind of like being a demigod for a while, right? Having that human blood going through their veins for a little bit, having eaten that stew. So if you guys look, here is one wall of many walls of real human skulls, okay? You can go tour all this and take notes, Shalon, if you want, of all those human sacrifices. A sacrificial bowl, they'd put certain organs and things in, right? Okay, all right, draw a line underneath everything you just wrote. And here we go, expanding the empire. They would make alliances if they could. Okay, it wasn't all war all the time. It was a lot of war a lot of the time, but not necessarily always. So if they could make an alliance, they would, and come to those people and say, hey, we can either fight you or you can come in. Well, they were known to be pretty like awesome blossom, right? You're not going to beat them. And so people would often say, we're in, we'll just join you. And so people would come in and join them. And if not, hey, we're going to go to war. And they kicked butt, and usually you lost, and they got a lot of human sacrifices. See you in the next part.